Jong-un is meeting with foreign leaders today, but not anyone from President Trump's team. We're going to tell you where he is and why. Plus, the left is targeting masculinity. Of course they are. We're going to debate what's really motivating them. And what key fact did those gun control marchers not understand? We'll have some video that will shock you. But first, when Trump wins on principle, that's the focus of tonight's angle. All right, given Friday's kick in the gut to the Trump base, you know, when the president decided to sign, not veto, that $1.3 trillion omnibus bill, well, the phrase Trump wins on principle might seem a little bit odd, to say the least. But bear with me. Amid the disappointment that a lot of you are rightly feeling, myself included, given the bait and switch on the border wall and the fact that Planned Parenthood gets full funding, I want to tell you tonight, there are victories on the horizon, especially involving one critical area that is woefully undercovered by the American media, in which the president, remember, relentlessly pressed on the campaign trail.
On trade, we are going to end the international abuse. Our massive chronic trade deficits are destroying the middle class and shifting money away from workers to large corporations who have no borders.
That's one of the big reasons why he got elected. And I'll tell you, Trump's team, they've been busily renegotiating trade deals and knocking down market barriers that have been killing off American manufacturing and hurting our workers. And the good fruits of this work are now emerging. Remember those once serious TV networks like CNN and CBS? Well, our trade policy for them doesn't merit as much airtime as porn stars and alleged paramours. But our trade relationship with the rest of the world has lasting impact on the lives of most Americans and their families. Trump has been pretty wily on trade overall, and he's made provocative and bold moves. He's talked tough, he's threatened tariffs, and at almost every turn, the globalists predicted total disaster.
When the U.S. president says he's going to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, this is basically a byword for, well, I might start a trade war.
There are real consequences to these statements and actions, and he doesn't seem to appreciate.
This is a toxic mix that we're in right now, and if the president pushed ahead with this, it's not too far a reach to say, could this be the thing that pushes the world into a period of very considerable instability?
Oh, my God. How do these people still work in television? I don't get it. Well, once again, the so-called experts, I say that all the time, the so-called experts were wrong. Trump's tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum and last week's proposal to raise $60 billion worth of tariffs on other Chinese goods have brought Beijing to the negotiating table, and they're getting results. Today's Chinese economic minister announced that they're continuing talks with the Trump administration, but they already committed to a lot, like this: easing U.S. access to the Chinese market, treating domestic and foreign firms equally, increasing U.S. semiconductor imports, that's big, and they will no longer require U.S. firms to hand over intellectual property to their Chinese partners in exchange for operating in the country. The Financial Times is reporting that the Trump team is also making headway in lowering Chinese tariffs on American cars, and that they're going to gain access to the Chinese financial sector. Well, folks, since we have a $375 billion trade deficit with China, this is all really good news. On trade, let's remember, the president has stood on principle. He stuck to his guns. And he completely altered the dynamic for the better. And it's not only in China. The White House says that a new NAFTA deal is in the offing. And we should note that Jared Kushner is working hard on this behind the scenes. Then today, we learned that Trump's tariff talk had brought back Korea to the trade bargaining table as well. I mean, think about this. Less than 3 months after he was elected, President Trump made it crystal clear what he thought of that Korean-U.S. free trade deal.
We have a horrible trade deal with Korea. But now, even before we do something with that, because we're negotiating the trade deal with Korea, and we'll either negotiate a fair deal or we're going to terminate the deal.
Well, of course, that horrified the globalists. But it got South Korea's attention. Big league. For months now, Trump's team has been plugging away, and you haven't heard a lot about it, at a total renegotiation of that agreement. Now, the deal was approved in 2012, and it used NAFTA as its framework. So it's not really all that shocking that it turned out to be a complete nightmare. In the first 5 years since it went into effect, our trade deficit with Korea increased for all but 1 month, 59 out of 60 months. Our auto sector was hardest hit, but others were as well. Last year, Korea shipped more than $16 billion worth of passenger cars here, but we sent only $1.5 billion worth of vehicles over there. Yet today, Korea announced it had made significant concessions to benefit U.S. automakers. While also, they're capping the amount of Korean steel that can flood into our markets. For that, they're going to get a partial exemption from Trump's tariffs. This is terrific news for American industry. And it's also great news for our national security as well, because it's removing obstacles to cooperating and dealing with the North Korean threat. It also shows us how Trump uses leverage. You got to use the leverage where you have it. Tariffs are not a four-letter word. Most presidents have used them selectively, but they've used them. But of course, the fake news, well, they prefer to ignore these substantive issues, you know, the ones that really matter. And all the progress that Trump has made for millions of Americans on these issues, citizens, by the way, who've seen their way of life, their standard of living destroyed over the past 2 decades. During the period of what? Unchecked trade abuses. You know, people who work for companies like Dusty Stevens.
My father worked at that smelter for 40 years. He retired early so another guy could keep his job. My brother, he was laid off during the downturn. He didn't come back to work. So this has directly affected our family, not only ours, but there's over 300 other families that were affected by this downturn, and now the Trump administration is giving that back to us.
Speaking for steel companies, aluminum companies, representing a lot of people. Those are the forgotten Americans. That's who turned out to vote for President Trump in 2016. They need him to keep challenging the Washington corruptocrats and changing policies that just do not work. While the left-wing resistance is marinating in things like protests, propaganda, and porn stars, the Trump administration should stick to first principles. Now, it's a shame they blew it on the omnibus, but they are killing it on trade. And so, we soldier on. And that's the angle. All right, what I just laid out really does speak to the disconnect that I've talked about for, I don't know, 15 years in the media and books and so forth, between the left and the rest of the country. Now, while the media froths at the mouth over Stormy Daniels and the March for Our Lives kids, tangible results are actually being achieved that directly benefit you and your family. And for all the talk about how motivated the Democrats are, I'm telling you, this is true and key to the midterms. Trump and the GOP are about results. The left, today at least, is about demagoguery. Most Americans aren't comfortable with what they saw over the weekend. The profanity, the crude posters, First Amendment, great, out there and make your points, that's fine. But the profanity and the anger, the nastiness, I don't think so. But conservatives do need to counter this. And they have to counter it with substance, thought, and results. Joining me now to discuss all this in the studio, Dave Bossie, Fox News contributor and the former deputy manager of the Trump campaign, and remotely, Austin Goolsbee, an economics professor at the University of Chicago and President Obama's former top economic advisor, and Kim Strassel, Wall Street Journal columnist and Fox News contributor. All right, let's start with you, Austin, because I remember not so long ago, the Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial about you. It was called Austin Goolsbee's Revenge. This was your revenge moment because you successfully, according to the Journal, convinced Barack Obama to abandon his campaign pledge to renegotiate NAFTA. And they credited you with bringing this unbridled enthusiasm for free trade back to the mindset of Barack Obama. That's wild considering where we are today, Austin.
Well, not exactly. First, congratulations to you, Laura, on the 100th show.
Thank you. We brought you on to celebrate, Austin. So good.
Yeah. Now, the thing that's happening with Donald Trump, I mean, they had a record-setting day on the stock market today precisely because Donald Trump is not going to do the things that he has been promising to do. Last week, when they thought he was going to enact these trade war-starting tariffs, the stock market had its worst week in years. Steel tariffs are not a good idea. They destroy hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs more than they save.
Because these are the cliches we hear all the time. You are fine.
It's not a cliche.
I just want to get this on the record. You are fine with every American steel manufacturer and aluminum manufacturer going out of business. You're fine with that.
No.
Correct?
No.
Well, what do you mean you're not fine with it? We had 19 of the top 23 steel makers in the world 20 years ago. We now have 3.
I didn't say I'm fine with it. I said putting in blanket steel tariffs destroys hundreds of thousands more manufacturing jobs than it saves.
How did we get China to the table?
If Donald Trump goes after Chinese intellectual property, I'm all for that. I applaud
you're all
him.
for that. How did we get China to the table? We got them to the table with the only leverage we had.
Austin, that's how we got them to the table for this great day on the market. That's a fact. Look, the last 25 years of presidents' failed policies, whether it's NAFTA, whether it's any of these bad deals with South Korea, these have cost American jobs. They've cost American companies. And that's what this president said. I made a promise during the campaign, and I'm going to keep it. Promise made, promise kept. He is bringing all of them to the table with strong words.
And let's go to Strassel here, though. Kimberly, like the Wall Street Journal, the word tariff is like, if you're for tariffs, I'm sorry, but the Wall Street Journal think you might as well be burning crosses on people's lawns. I'm sorry, but the Journal hates tariffs of any type. Temporary tariffs, they think tariffs should never be, frankly, as far as I could tell, never be instituted. I submit that the Journal has been wrong on this issue for 25 years. These tariffs are what got Europe. They're paying attention. They're working with Japan and us to put pressure on China. China's brought to the table. Korea's brought to the table. Our manufacturers are going to benefit, and the world's taking notice. Maybe we pull him back. That's okay. But we had leverage, and he used it.
Laura, what's the definition of trade? It's one country doing something with a competitive advantage over the other. You trade because one can do it more cheaply than the other. They both benefit in the end. That's the idea. Now, when you talk about some of these steel manufacturers going under, part of it was because we weren't doing as good a job, and partly because of liberal policies imposing vast amounts of regulation and taxes on our companies. So one of the most important things that Donald Trump has done since he came into office was deal with our domestic agenda and begin to make it easier for manufacturers from an energy perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a tax perspective to begin competing in the world. You also want the rest of the world to play by a fair set of rules.
Well, here's the problem. Yeah, I understand that the trade is one country makes something, makes it cheaper, that goes to the other country. I get that. The problem, though, with China is the market influence and the market domination they'd been able to develop because of allowing in WTO, permanent trade relation status. They were able to manipulate the market. This was not an efficient marketplace. And I would submit the marketplace was horrifically distorted by state subsidies, by trade, by currency devaluation, but most importantly, by cheating, dumping globally, not just dumping in the United States.
We don't like cheaters.
Let's say you're right. I think you probably are right. Then we ought to be for a policy that would reduce those other countries' barriers more than the U.S. But that's exactly what the TPP was going to do when Donald Trump abandoned
We're still trying to.
That's
wait
right,
a second.
thankfully.
Austin, they want me to
now
go to
those countries in Asia are signing up trade deals with China.
I'm sorry.
This president
they signed deals with China and not the United States.
This president ran on fair trade. This president ran on fair trade. He ran on being president of the United States and representing his country to the best of his ability. And tough talk, talking about tariffs, talking about ending these bad trade deals is what is getting American workers back.
More importantly, how many people remember when Hillary argued about how much in favor she was of the TPP? Nobody. How many of you remember when Barack Obama campaigned in favor of extending NAFTA indefinitely? Nobody. How many of you remember when the Democrats are getting up and saying, boy, in 2020, we're going to be running for more trade deals. We're going to be in favor of more trade deals. They all know that this is a winner electorally. That's why Obama was against NAFTA without renegotiation. Hillary was not arguing for the TPP. This is all a big shell game for the Democrats. They claim to be for the little guy. They argue they're going to be, and then when they get into office, they nix their their little guy trade policies. That happened. You're the one who convinced Obama. You convinced him, didn't you, Austin, to nix the NAFTA? That's what the Wall Street Journal said. Kimberly,
this is why Republicans have always led on trade policy, which is a good thing because Democrats aren't going to do it. They will always cave in to unions and special interests who are demanding certain things.
Laura's endorsing what you're calling the Democratic position.
No, I actually think Democrats and Republicans can work together on a lot of issues. I actually think this is one of the most important issues.
What you have to do, though, is call out the truly rogue actors. And the good news here.
Okay. All right, guys, we have to move. As fascinating as this is, we have to move to the tactics of the left. So much is happening. I'm sorry to end that part of the discussion. I want to play for you a soundbite from the March for Our Lives over the weekend when two of the most well-known activists, pro-gun control activists, spoke. Let's watch.
I want an incredibly large voter registration turnout to happen here.
We are going to make this the voting issue. To those politicians supported by the NRA that allow the continued slaughter of our children and our future, I say get your resumes ready.
Ooh, who wrote that line? Let's go to Kimberly on that. Well, this was supposedly about guns, but I said a couple of weeks ago this was really about voter registration. This is about getting your power back. And so the gun issue for now, then they'll move on to another issue. Your reaction to the weekend?
Yeah, I think what happened here is that this is an issue that many on the left have seized upon as a way of further motivating their base to come out. I think the problem, though, is that while it does motivate some on the Democratic base, there are vast numbers of Americans out there, Laura, who appreciate not just the First Amendment, but the Second Amendment, too, and understand that we apply our Bill of Rights equally, and that some of the solutions or the arguments that are being espoused by a lot of those who showed up are not going to be the answer to gun violence or broader violence in our community.
Yeah, we need to protect our students. I have 4 kids in 3 different schools. We want our kids to be protected, but it is a good guy with a gun. We need better background checks. We need mental health checks. Those are important things that we can actually affect immediately. The legislative process is going to take a long time.
Austin, I think actually it was genius what they did in organizing this. I think Republicans aren't all that good at the protest culture. They're not all that good at these voter registration drives. But I actually was impressed by the organization, the money that flowed in. Final thoughts. Who paid for it? Who paid for it? Not David Hogue. Go ahead.
In my view, the battleground suburban districts, issues like should there be universal background checks and more attention paid to mental health and whether people can get access to guns, that is an issue that favors Democrats and favors a kind of a centrist approach.
All right, now we're out of time, guys. Fantastic.
Well,
they always hang their hat on this.
65 million Americans own plenty of guns.
Oh, that's a lot of you. That's all in your house, Bossy. Up next, new info about what the FBI knew before that deadly Pulse nightclub terror attack. This is another black eye for the Bureau. Details on the night of the attack, but his widow is facing federal charges for obstruction of justice and aiding and abetting her husband. Remember, she dropped him off that night. At the trial today, an FBI special agent testified that Omar's father, Sadiq Mateen, was an FBI informant for more than a decade prior to the Pulse nightclub attack. And according to reporters in the courtroom, the agent also revealed the FBI was considering making Omar himself an informant. Nice. This despite the fact that the agency knew Omar had previously spoken out to friends and associates about having ties to terrorist organizations. That was all a joke, I'm sure. For more on this incredible story, let's go to former LAPD detective Mark Furman and Terry Turchi, who formerly worked in FBI counterterror, and describing both of you gentlemen in that those bland terms don't really capture it. But I've got to say, when I saw this cross, I thought of both of you saying, we've got to get you both on tonight. Terry, let's start with you. How is it that we're just learning now about Omar Mateen? We had kind of not heard much about him in the aftermath of the attack, but now we learned his father was an informant, and then they thought about actually recruiting Omar himself, but then they also found out about these musings about his connection to terrorist organizations.
I think what surprised me most about this, Laura, is that we just now learn it. I mean, usually when you're in the lead up to a trial, you have to disclose everything you have that might be relevant to the defense. And in this instance, they waited a long time. And I can tell you this, that literally within minutes after the shooting at the nightclub and after Omar Mateen's name was known, the FBI knew that Omar Mateen was connected to Sadiq. They would have done an indices or an index check, and they would have known immediately the FBI had prior interest with these people. That's not at all unusual. What I'm surprised about is that they would have decided during the lead up to this trial to not say anything about that until now, because you could take big chances in waiting this long. As it turns out, it appears the judge late this afternoon said, look, this is not relevant, this continues on. But there's a lot of questions here, and the one glaring thing that comes to mind, if Sadiq was in fact an FBI informant during that time, and I think the phrase was various points between 2005 and 2016, it's very possible he was even providing information on something else, and they decided we need to keep that part of this as quiet for as long as we can. But ultimately, it was the prosecution team that had to make a decision, and the DOJ, of if and when they were ever going to reveal this. And of course, today it was revealed, and it makes you feel uneasy, and it's a little bit hard to explain it, because the average person would say, that doesn't make any sense. So it's going to feed a lot of conspiracy theories, regardless of how it goes from here on out.
And Furman, what effect might this have on local law enforcement? Kind of be big-footed by the FBI here on this.
Well, Laura, you know, it's my experience, and I don't know if Terry will agree, but the FBI is rather rigid with their investigative techniques, and they do not like to share information. Information is power, and they prefer to keep all of it in-house. So it's very difficult. Boston bombing was a perfect example of that. They don't want to share information with metropolitan police departments, no matter if it's a specialized unit or not. But I look at this situation, and the first question I have is, he was an informant for what? And they're trying to recruit Omar for what reason? So it's obvious that the FBI felt that Omar did have a connection to terrorism, and that he could possibly, if they could flip him, give them information that they could otherwise not obtain. So not revealing this would be obvious, because they don't know if they made a mistake or not, but they'd rather play it safe.
Yeah, I want to play for you, Terry, a soundbite from Director Comey, of course, June 13th, 2016, about this matter. Let's watch.
We're also going to look hard at our own work to see whether there is something we should have done differently. So far, the honest answer is, I don't think so. So far, we see no indication that this was a plot directed from outside the United States, and we see no indication that he was part of any kind of network. It is also not entirely clear at this point just what terrorist group he aspired to support.
Wouldn't that have been the time, Terry, for the Director Comey? By the way, this was a presidential election year. Let's not forget that, 2016. We were fudging a lot of stuff in 2012 when Romney was running against Obama during Benghazi. I know I'm sounding really cynical here, like conspiratorial, but the Benghazi thing sticks in my mind. It wasn't a terror attack. It wasn't caused by a video instead of a terror attack. Now this, like, we don't say, well, his father was an informant. You could see how that coming out in an election year. Imagine what Trump would have done with that against Hillary. Go ahead, Terry.
Laura, there was a day I would have said here, especially after I first got into the FBI, and I would have said, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is just absurd. But it's hard to believe in this day and age, and listening to Comey there, first of all, again, he knew at that point in time when he gave that press conference, as did Sally Yates, who was standing next to him, that Sadiq Mateen was a bureau informant or had been a bureau informant. I don't know why they chose not to say anything about that then, but I believe that they'd already made a judgment that there's some reason that we can't bring this up, we can't front this yet. We're going to wait and let the prosecutors figure it all out when we get closer to trial. I fronted one of those possible reasons. Maybe he was reporting on something else. to go back to something Mark said, and I do agree with him, in national security cases, and especially since 9/11, but really this goes all the way back to the days after Watergate and the hearings, and then FISA, which of course we're talking about all the time now. The FBI changed. It changed dramatically in dealing with national security issues and domestic terrorism. And we are still now, I think, in my opinion, paying a price for guidelines that aren't keeping up with what we're now facing.
All right, Mark, really quickly, close it out.
Well, you know, when I listened to Terry talk, and he's an FBI agent, the thing that FBI Director Comey was commenting on is it's interesting that he is sure that they were not involved in a network, but the network lives inside the brains of these terrorists. And, you know, it's been 17 years since 9/11. I think they've figured out how to not get on the radar a very large percentage of the time to actually still have contacts and still be part of a terrorist network.
All right, guys, fantastic segment, as always, with both of you. And directly ahead, North Korea's Kim Jong-un leaves this country for the first time since becoming leader. But where did he go, reportedly? And what might this move mean for his potential meeting with President Trump? Stay there. So much has happened, and earlier this month, President Trump announced that he would personally meet with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un to try to put an end to the standoff over the country's nuclear weapons. But according to reports, President Trump will not be the first foreign leader to take a meeting with Rocket Man. Bloomberg News is reporting that Kim is currently in China in his first foreign trip since taking power in 2011. Trying to make sense of all of this. Is this really happening? Let's bring in Gordon Chang, who's the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. And with me here in Washington is Harry Kazianis, the director of the Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest, two experts in China and North Korea. Gordon, let's start with you. I read this today, and I almost fell out of my chair. I mean, the armored car procession going from North Korea to China. Are we all being punked here? I mean, what's going on?
Well, first of all, there's no confirmation that Kim Jong-un is in Beijing, but I believe that he is. And what's going on is that Xi Jinping is trying to pull the string on the North Koreans. You know, Kim Jong-un, the first foreign leader he wanted to meet was South Korea's Moon Jae-in. The second one was President Trump. Xi Jinping says, no, the optics look really bad. I'm going to force the North Korean to come to Beijing because Kim Jong-un, in Xi Jinping's mind, is a vassal. And so this sort of shows that, look, China does control North Korea. When China really wants something, they get it. And I think that really right now what we are seeing is the Chinese telling the North Koreans, you got to do what we, the Chinese, say.
Yeah, hey, buddy, I'm going to be president for life. You come to me. Harry, let's go to you on this. This is such a wild story. We're still wondering if this meeting with President Trump will really happen. Everybody freaked out when that was announced. But this could be significant because it might involve the U.S. putting pressure on China to help either, you know, smooth this out, pave the way perhaps to a meeting. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's clear the Chinese do have a huge role to play here. But I think there's actually a bigger question you need to ask. Is Kim Jong-un actually panicking? Because we have to remember, what do the North Koreans actually get out of a negotiation with the United States? Nothing. Because now the Trump administration is demanding that they give up their nuclear weapons. We've had John Bolton make a lot of statements, who's going to be the national security advisor, to say the only negotiation is how are we going to pack up your nuclear weapons and bring them back to the United States. So what do the North Koreans get here? I have a feeling the North Koreans could actually be in Beijing to figure out how to get out of this, and hopefully the Chinese can help them do that.
Get out of the meeting. You do the meeting.
Exactly. It's possible.
Let's talk, Gordon, about the thinking of both the Chinese and North Koreans separately on Bolton as national security advisor, because these staff shakeups might kind of, bore people across the country, but they're watched very closely in the Middle East, watched very closely in Asia as well. Bolton, neoconservative, hawk on the Iraq War and other things. What does North Korea think?
Well, I think North Korea is very concerned that the United States is going to strike them, a bloody nose or whatever. Also, I think that they understand that Bolton, with his big proliferation security initiative, is going to cut off North Korea's sales of weapons to, for instance, Iran. This has been going on for decades, and American administrations have not stopped it. I think Bolton, his national security advisor, is going to put an end to that. And I'm sure the North Koreans are very concerned. Also the Chinese, because the Chinese have been aiding in this deadly trade, and they're not going to like to see Bolton in 1600 Pennsylvania really putting an end to their support for North Korea.
Harry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% accurate. I'd actually go even further. I think John Bolton is North Korea and China's worst nightmare. He's going to drive very hard terms when it comes to negotiations. He's also going to drive hard terms in terms of trade, as you've been talking on for the last few segments. I think it's a fact that Chinese have been really doing a lot of damage to our economy. And now that you're going to have maximum pressure on North Korea, but you're also going to have maximum pressure on China.
I had a friend text me, dear friend, done very well, let's just put it this way, in New York. And he's a big global trade guy. He's petrified of John Bolton. I mean, I know this guy's afraid of anything, but he literally thinks John Bolton himself is going to blow up the world, Gordon. And I've heard this from Wall Streeter after Wall Streeter, because they're looking at the markets. Oh, my God, John Bolton, that's the last person they should have been. Do you hear the same thing I hear? And you see it on TV. They're just in a total frothy meltdown over John Bolton. It's just ludicrous.
Yeah, no, it is ludicrous. You know, this is the way people on the markets work. You know, they don't want any disruption to the way the world is currently at. But, you know, Bolton, I think, is important, because what he's saying is that, look, we've got a China and Russia problem, and we've got to deal with it, because if we want to have a future, we got to make sure that the Chinese and Russians are not attacking our society, which they've been doing by trying to undermine our democracy. You'll
notice that political and media leaders on the left are slowly chipping away at this idea of masculinity. In other words, what it means to be a man. Don't believe me? Well, check out this discussion of school shooters on MSNBC.
Who's been told to man up? What does that mean?
No clue. I got no. Show no emotion. Yeah.
What's the hardest part about growing up for boys?
Hiding the pain. Yeah. Not being able to express yourself.
Oh, my word. So the problem is masculinity, and targeting it isn't reserved for left-wing cable shows. Here's former President Obama.
A lot of our problems are caused by old men. No offense, men who are old.
Well, he's not exactly a spring chicken. I mean, come on. Let's discuss this. Bring in liberal analysts. Oh, not call you liberal analyst, Julie. You're an analyst who happens to be a little liberal.
Yeah.
To debate.
You could call me left-leaning, I would say.
How are you? Let's talk about this. Like, when I hear these attacks on masculinity, I hear the left equating masculine, what it means to be masculine, with abusive or criminality. Now, we're all against abuse. We're all against criminality. At least we should be. If we're not, you're weird. So for me, when you're somebody, you say someone's masculine, it doesn't, I don't see that. Or, no, of course, I don't want that, and no one I know wants that. But it's okay for a man to, as friends of mine say, protect, provide, and defend. And I'm sorry, most women I happen to know like men who like to do that they carry themselves that way, and that's what they think their role is. Today, in schools and in discussions like we saw on MSNBC, that's considered kind of icky. That whole construct is oppressive. Why is that?
Well, I think that there's nothing necessarily wrong with, a man who wants to protect and defend. I think that what that specific MSNBC segment was talking about is the fact that rigid gender roles, specifically in boys, are tied to higher rates of suicide, substance abuse, violence. So it's basically saying that these gender roles are creating an environment in which men and boys feel that they can't express themselves, which they have to be.
But Julie, how is that connected? Gender, I mean, we've had gender roles for, I don't know, millennia. Mm-hmm. So we're like, well, gender roles are causing boys to commit suicide. Well, maybe there's a lot of societal factors involved in drug abuse, in promiscuity, in shaming, in substance abuse of other types, addictions, violent video games, isolation because of social media, family dissolution. Men have been tending to be masculine for a long, long time.
Right, and I think
but
that
the feminists are like, well, it's the masculinity causing them to do all that.
I think that in the feminist community, you know, you hear a lot of talk. We talk a lot about how gender roles tend to hold women back, but there's also something that needs to be discussed about how gender roles tend to hold men back. So men are taught from a young age, from very, very young age, preschool age, that they're supposed to be unemotional, that they're supposed to be macho, that they're supposed to be aggressive. And because of that, they don't really have healthy valves for, you know, an outlet of their anger, frustration, things they're feeling sensitive about, rage, things they're experiencing in schools. And because of that, it expresses itself often. And yes, there are certainly other factors at play here, but it often expresses itself through violence and through, you know, turning inward, through depression, through self-harm, through substance abuse. And I'm not saying that it's the only cause, that gender roles are the only things at play here, but they
feel like they're all predators. I mean, I know a lot of guys who work in a workplace, maybe it's lawyers or businessmen, and they feel like it's open season on them. I mean, these are good people. They feel like we can't compliment anyone. We got to be careful what we say. And they feel like literally, if they're 25 and single, they can't ask out, you know, a gal down the hallway for a drink. Because if they do, that's going to be considered somehow overly aggressive or abusive. I'm telling you, it's not easy to be a man in the current work environment or in the current societal involvement.
Well, I would argue it's a lot harder to be a woman in the current work environment, in the current, you know, sort of scope of society.
Yeah,
so,
well, that's a given.
Right. So, you know, I think that perhaps these men are experiencing additional pressure. They're having to watch what they say, watch how they behave. I think that that's a welcome change after the way women have long been treated in the workplace. So I wouldn't say that that's one of the root causes of these increased self-harming and violent behaviors in men. I think that gender roles play a part in that, and all the things that come with that. These gender roles create isolation. They create anger and a lot of pressure.
I'm sorry, we're going to go run to black, but great segment. I have a question. Over the weekend, why did they really march? Coming up.
I think there needs to be a complete ban on assault weapons.
I think there definitely needs to be a ban on these assault rifles. Assault weapons are not necessary for home defense.
So there was a consensus among marchers that assault weapons should be banned. But how many of them actually knew what an assault weapon was?
Do you know what an assault weapon is?
Yeah, it's assault weapon. It's like I kind of do, but kind of don't.
No, I guess. But assault weapons, like, does that sound safe to you?
The same amount of people die by assault weapons as do car crashes in a given year.
As what?
Do car crashes. It's a similar number.
Okay. It's not actually, but.
Or isn't it similar?
No, it's not. So assault weapons count for about 3% of gun deaths, and car crashes are about the leading cause.
Okay, I thought that was. But a lot of people die by gun deaths.
I think the Constitution in and of itself is something that's outdated. Times have changed, and I don't necessarily agree with the Second Amendment to begin with.
Now that's the truth, totally. Well, this is a problem with political theater lacking substance. Lots of people show up and they applaud for Lin-Manuel and Amy Schumer. But what are they marching for? To repeal the Second Amendment? To ban weapons they can't even define? Well, the truth is they don't really know. One thing is clear after watching the maniacal wall-to-wall coverage over the weekend. They're marching to save lives, the political lives of these people. We'll be right back.